to the chat. What made you join us today? What would you like to hear about? I'll just give you a moment to type into the chat. Okay, we've got lecture in English. What would you like to hear about in this conversation today? About teaching techniques, okay. Okay, yeah, the sort of the English, the status quo of English learning in the world, yeah, which is a really broad topic. Any other ideas? Well, while people get the chance to type those in, I'm going to introduce you to Noni Lasau, who you can see the photo here. She's the Thompson Professor of Education and Society at Harvard University, and her focus is supporting language and literacy development. And Noni's been a really important person for NGL in helping us shape our approach in the materials we've created for multilingual learners of English. And Noni Lasau's research into global language and literacy learning has led to a deeper understanding of what we think is needed to meet the needs of today's K-12 learners worldwide. She believes that the dominant model for English medium instruction doesn't really reflect the world as it is now. As you can see from this timeline, through population growth and changes, rapid social and economic development that we've seen over the last 2 decades, we've also seen the nature and the characteristics of the people who attend private K-12 institutions globally shift and change in response to that. And through her research, Noni recognised that globalisation and social and economic development demand new skills of the next generation, and that key shifts in curriculum design and learning materials were needed in order to develop the type of competencies that students are going to need. And this includes things like advanced literacy and communication skills, critical thinking and problem-solving skills, and the ability to work with new information to solve problems and influence others, to deal with ambiguity, to the ability to work in fluid team-based settings, so things like collaborative learning and global and intercultural knowledge and competencies become really important. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, last year, we carried out an extensive research project because, taking into account Noni's analysis, we wanted to get closer to this reality that I've just described to you, to sort of see how these changes were playing out inside schools. And we wanted to get a really meaningful sense of what matters to educators in these institutions. What were they trying to achieve? What was important to them? As well as what kind of challenges they might be facing in preparing their students to study some or all of their curriculum in English and helping their students develop a global mindset. And we decided the best way to get meaningful data to give us a really comprehensive snapshot was to conduct in-depth interviews. And we conducted 67 interviews globally. Most of these were with educators, often in leadership positions, principals, academic heads, and coordinators in K-12 institutions. We also conducted interviews with our own colleagues who regularly visit these schools, as well as academic consultants that we partner with to provide training and professional development. And we drew many different conclusions from this research. One of the things it enabled us to do was to develop a bird's eye view of the types of schools that we encountered globally. And as you can see on this slide, we identified that the K-12 landscape contains a whole spectrum of school types that's constantly evolving. It isn't a static space. We identified 5 broad types of school, which you can see here. And in general, the current trend is towards English medium instruction, learning all or some of your subjects in English. And institutions are all at different points on this journey, and where they are on this journey also helps determine the sets of needs that they might have And so now I have another question for you. Of the categories of schools that you can see on the screen, which one do you think best describes your school? Would you say you're a bilingual school, an aspiring bilingual school? Would you put yourself as an aspiring English medium instruction school, or are you already fully delivering the curriculum in English? Okay, so we have bilingual, lots of bilingual schools. And that might depend on where you are in the world. It might depend on where you are in your journey towards English medium instruction. It might depend on what curricula are available to you. It might depend on things like what type of teachers you're able to recruit and what the goals are of the parents and the students that join your schools. And we got some standard ELT too. And below, we can see some of the areas that the educators we interviewed most needed support in. So if you wouldn't mind clicking through, Emily, the next three. So 3 of the areas really were language support, that students need to help them reach a sufficient level of proficiency in English to make it possible to either implement an international curriculum or help students study other subjects in English. Another support need was helping provide pathways into other subject areas, both in terms of language skills and academic skills. And then another area for focus was helping equip students with the skills and competencies that employers and national governments increasingly value, like collaboration and problem solving, making presentations and other soft skills that teachers identified. We go to the next slide. And we also identified a set of goals and challenges that these institutions were facing. And in today's discussion, we're going to hone in on these 3 goals. We're going to talk about the challenges and the triumphs in achieving them. But first, before we get started, I'd like to give our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves and say a few words about their own experiences in implementing a curriculum in English and in helping their students to develop a global mindset. And Renata, I'd like you to invite you to speak first.
Thank you, Rachel. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I know we have people from all over the world and in very different time zones. Well, here I'm the head bilingual coordinator for a network of schools. But when we started, we were only one independent school. And now we have 11 schools working with this bilingual program that we designed. We are a Brazilian school and we follow a Brazilian curriculum, but we have a bilingual program implemented in all these 11 schools today. I believe 2 pieces of information which are relevant when we look at the Brazilian scenario are the first one, even though Brazil is a very huge country with a lot of people, only about 5% of Brazilian people speak any English. So it's not a language that most people speak in our country. The second piece of information is the vast majority of Brazilian students are Brazilian. We do not have foreigners studying in our schools here. When we look at the school I work in, we do not have any foreigners studying here. So all they listen to is Portuguese. So English is not present in their daily lives. So we needed to create an environment where English was present. This is why we designed this bilingual program we are working with now, in which our students have around 10 hours of English lessons a day. We start with early childhood education, moving to elementary, middle school, and up until high school students. The goal was not only to offer extended hours of contact with English, but also to work with language and content in an integrated way. So something we say here a lot is we not only have English lessons, but we also have lessons taught in English. So that is our goal. And to support us in this journey, we have specific materials that allows us to teach specific subject areas like science and social emotional skills in English. We have other materials and other books, which also allow us to revisit other subject areas in English. So sometimes we have maths, arts, and social studies being taught in English and being revisited by the English teacher after the Portuguese teacher has already covered that subject. And also projects, which allow us to integrate content and language, but also help us raise cultural awareness in our students. Our main goal here is not only to prepare our students academically speaking and also looking at their professional life in the future, but the idea is to prepare them for their lives in general. So we want to give them tools and offer skills and abilities so that they can not only communicate in English, but so that they can go beyond the language. You know, they can actually navigate through different topics and areas. So by doing that, we hope we are helping them creating a global mindset and being better prepared for life.
Thanks very much, Renata. It'd be great later on in our discussion to come back to what you said about multilingual learners in the context of a country where they're not as exposed to English, and to contrast that with Mahmoud and Andrew's experiences, and also the role of projects. But first, I'm going to ask Andrew, could you introduce yourself too, please?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Andrew. I'm currently an English teacher at American International School of Kuwait in Kuwait. I just arrived maybe 3 or 4 months ago in Kuwait. And before that, I was teaching for a few years in China. And before that, I was teaching in the United States. I'll keep my opening remarks really brief and hopefully relevant, I think, to both people who are responsible for curriculum development at their school, but also to people who are just classroom teachers teaching students whose home language is in English. And I think both in Kuwait and in China, and in my experience in the United States, I think two things are really, really important in terms of implementing this kind of curriculum in an international context with diverse groups of students. I think the first thing is, as much as possible, to make sure that the curriculum decisions that you make, and also your decisions as a classroom teacher, are based on really knowing your students really, really well. Knowing sort of what their academic strengths are, what their academic opportunities to grow are, what their long-term academic goals are, but also really getting to know students on, sort of on a personal level in terms of what are they interested in, what really gets them excited, what are their hopes, what are their dreams, what are their fears, what do they really want to talk about and write about and, and read about. And to really, as much as possible, as both a classroom teacher and as a curriculum developer, to really focus on things that are based on what students need in order to achieve their goals, and also what they're really excited to talk about. And so I think that's always been sort of a guiding principle for both my practice as a teacher and in my previous role as a department head. The other thing that I think is related and really important to keep in mind for students, for all students, is making sure there's so many different ways to get students to achieve what they need to achieve. So many different strategies and techniques that you can use to get students to develop the skills that they need. And I think it's really important, particularly as we think about how ESL teaching is changing, to really make sure that the tasks, activities that students are focused on are relevant, are really interesting to them, and get them practicing really authentic and real world skills. Your ability to do this as a teacher or curriculum developer might depend a lot on the constraints that you have based on, the curriculum that is available to you, but finding as much flexibility and opportunity to make the English language or whatever language you're teaching them relevant to their everyday experiences and to what their goals are, I think is really, really important. And what that might look like in one country might be very different from what it looks like in another country. And what it looks like at one school might be very different from what that looks like in a different school. So I think that, those are, if I were to say there's two takeaways, I think keeping it relevant for students, keeping it interesting, and also, really getting to know your students well and focusing your curriculum decisions on that's been true everywhere I've taught.
That's really interesting, this concept of the teacher as a curator of the experience of learning English and this question of relevance. And relevance was something that you talked about quite a lot. I remember, Mahmoud, when I interviewed you last year, the importance that students feel a connection to the English that they're learning and the content that they're learning about and their own environments and their own contexts. Would you like to introduce yourself and talk a little about your experience in this area?
Good morning, evening, depending on your time zone, everyone. My name is Mahmoud Salman. I'm currently the HOD of English department in a bilingual school called Global Bilingual in Kuwait. And to hit back at the point that Andrew was mentioning earlier, the needs and knowing your students and connecting to them, I found with my 14 years of experience here in the country that the best way to tailor your curriculum and the best way to get close to those students and make the curriculum accessible to them is by tailoring it first to who they really are, but doing that is trying to understand the culture, because you're trying to establish a global mindset and teach English to them, not only because of the the grade level they're at or English as a subject. You're trying to create a long life learner who's going to understand the word and accept others and go out there to universities, and especially here in Kuwait, as Andrew probably now can tell, most of the students strive to study abroad, UK, States, Canada, Australia, and countries that English is the native language. And to do so, they need to understand also the culture, but you can't just tell them this is the culture without relating it to who they really are. So through the experience is to connect the language they're learning to who they really are, accepting who they are, accepting their culture, and then connecting that, reflecting it to the word around them. The other point is English is as a mean of education, as a mean of not as a subject, but also relating it to other subjects like math, science, basically talking about the STEM. It's important because with the context, with the culture that we're in here in Kuwait, we figured that the students don't get enough chances to speak the language, and acquisition of language, mastering of language needs exposure. And I can feel the pain Renata has been talking about, because we have a little bit close interaction with students, and that time in the classroom is never enough for them to master the language, and thus getting the language not taught but emphasized in other subjects such as in math, science, even with the physical education, PE, computer. All the other subjects go hand in hand in helping students master the language, understand the language, and know that this is a means of learning rather than a subject that I need to pass or a subject that I need to score high on, because English language nowadays is a lifestyle. It's just what these students will grow to use forever on, based on what's happening around the world. So to wrap up, I think accepting your culture, tailoring the curriculum to the culture first, and then connecting it to the word around them, is going to help those students see the connection, accept the connection, and be more willing to adapt and, you know, make it part of their life, make it part of their understanding. Thank you very much, everyone. Hope I
Thanks very much, Mahmoud. That's really thought-provoking intro. And lots of questions spring into mind here, so I'm trying to decide which order to ask them in. I mean, all three of you have talked about the kinds of goals that we're trying to achieve, you know, mastery of English being sort of the first stepping stone. And then we want to think about establishing the relevance and the importance of English and the relevance to students and their own reality. And then the connection with the rest of the world, and also the pathways into the other subject areas. They're quite ambitious goals to achieve. What are the challenges? What types of challenges would you say that you face in trying to achieve these goals? And I'm going to come back to you, Renata, again, if that's okay.
Sure. Well, there are lots of challenges. Life without challenges is no fun, right? So it wouldn't be any different. I believe mostly when we look at Brazil and we look at the amount of people who speak English, as I mentioned before, when we look at staff and hiring and training people, this is definitely one of our biggest challenges. The teachers, when they come to us and they come to work at our school, they are mostly EFL teachers. They're used to teaching English just as a foreign language. They have never taught language and content in an integrated way. So they need training and they need support. We are working really hard. We have been working really hard in the past years to provide that for them. But we also need professionals who have an open mindset in order to, acquire these new abilities and help our students achieve their goals. Also, I believe this is a challenge that we face every day, and we will be facing it forever, is when both of Andrew and Mahmoud mentioned the fact that we have to keep it relevant to our students. It has to be interesting to them, and they have to be connected to what they are learning, or else they won't want to keep studying it for so long. When we have students starting at such early ages, like 2 years old and 3 years old, they will move on and study for like 10, 11 years with us. So we really need to look at what is relevant and interesting to them. And that is an everyday challenge.
Great. And Mahmoud, would you be able to comment on any of that and add any additional challenges that you've experienced it yourself?
What I faced basically with the students trying to connect the curriculum to them is that most curriculum or let's say textbooks are designed for native speakers or taken from the native speaker's point of view. And the difficulty there is trying to adapt that point of view and make it connect to, especially if you're talking about the Arab word and the culture here, and how can that be something that those students will accept and be able to, understand, and then we can move from there. Because if they don't feel, as we said, they don't feel connected, that's going to be very difficult to them. The other part here is, the other thing is that once those students go out of class, to them, it feels like speaking English, especially that they're so proud of their mother tongue, whoever they are, wherever they are around the world, feels like not only a challenge, but some sort of neglect of their mother tongue. Convincing them, trying to talk to them about the importance of the language. It's not that you're forgetting your mother tongue or undermining it. On the other hand, you're trying to learn a language and acquire a language that's going to be very useful for you. These kind of conversations sometimes come to the part where we stand at different sides of the point of view, how you can approach them in that part.
The concept that you're not losing anything, you're gaining something,
exactly.
and you're actually enriching. which is the whole concept of the multilingual learner. Would any of you like to volunteer a kind of definition of what it means to be a multilingual learner? Any kind of ideas that you have of what it means to be a multilingual learner and how you would describe that or sell that to your students if you're meeting with this resistance?
I might say being multilingual learner means that you adapt, acquire, and understand cultures. You become an international citizen, just not someone who lives only in a certain country within a certain culture. You can live and adapt and be proud of who you are as an international person rather than someone who just fits in this country or this culture, because language represents the culture, and thus when you learn that language, you learn the culture and you become one with it.
And able to navigate across a variety of contexts. And yeah, great definition there. And actually, talking of people who've had to navigate lots of different contexts, Andrew, you've taught across 3 very different teaching contexts, because you started out teaching in the US, you then had a period of time in China, and now you're in Kuwait. Are there any lessons learned or even observations that you've been able to make from around what the differing priorities or challenges that you've encountered across those 3 different teaching environments, and maybe lessons that you've drawn from that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say that one is that kids are kids everywhere. And, no matter where you might be teaching, a lot of the same principles of teaching students in China, in Kuwait, in the United States, the general principles are very, very similar. You definitely have to make adaptations, as Mahmoud and Renata pointed out, to students' culture, to their context, to their individual needs, their individual goals. But a lot of the principles are very similar across my experiences, at least in different schools. And I think that as I mentioned before, getting to know students, getting to know the school, parents, the whole environment of the school when you first enter the school, and to get to know how students perceive their goal in terms of English language learning, that you have to sort of take it on an individual school basis, and even on an individual student basis. Because
I imagine there are lots of stakeholders in the mix that you need to also consider in terms of what the goals are, like parents, the school administration. Absolutely.
Often, government or other people who are responsible for supervising curriculum, parents are incredibly important to establish an early relationship with, to understand how they see students' goals and what their expectations are and what their expectations of a good teacher is. And, I think even becoming familiar with, in one country or one school, what does good teaching look like for the students? What does good teaching look like for the parents and, school leaders as well? I think that's really important to, number one, to get to know, but also to be willing to adapt to as you move to a different school.
Yeah, and we've been talking, at a very aspirational level so far about the types of skills and competencies and our vision for these, global citizens. But there are also sometimes conflicting goals and priorities for those different stakeholders. And I remember, Andrew, when Ian interviewed you, you talked about there being this tension between trying to prepare students for international examinations that they need to pass and trying to also nurture in them all of these soft skills and competencies that we want to equip them with in order to help them become global citizens. Maybe Renata, is that something that you've experienced? Have you experienced that conflict between the need to sort of pass exams and and trying to find time in the curriculum for the soft skills?
As you guys mentioned, there are very different stakeholders involved, and it's normal for parents when they enroll students in school, especially a school that is promising to deliver bilingual kids, that they want us to meet their expectations and to teach their kids everything that's possible to be taught. But at the same time, as you said, Rachel, we have to nurture them and take care of them, and also provide them with soft skills and teach beyond language. So what we usually try to do is try to find a balance of it, and we trust that the program itself will prepare them for international certifications, that the classes we're teaching, that the professionals that we're putting there to help students are doing their best. So the program itself will do what it needs to be done, instead of focusing too much on language and specific abilities. And it's been working so far. Eventually, we need to talk to parents and to let them know that everything is okay and it's going to work out, especially when we have newcomers and parents that are not used to what we've been doing. Adults tend to find very strange that we only speak English to the kids, and they're afraid that they're not going to understand, but they do pretty quickly. So it's something that we have to look at throughout the year, but it's been working so far.
Great. So it's kind of that mix of managing expectations, giving them the kind of information they need that's going to reassure them. Have you experienced similar responses, Mahmoud, and similar concerns from the parents?
Of course, a lot of the parents come, even the parents themselves had almost close to none knowledge of English language, and they kind of convey that fear of the language to their kids. They want them to learn it, but at the same time, they kind of convey the fear of the language to them, and they come and say, like, my kid doesn't understand. Well, the idea is to educate, as Renato said, educate the parents first, ask them about their expectations, know where they want their kids to be, and show them, let's sort of a roadmap of what is the kid going to learn until he gets there. And then you would have the parents come after a year or two, once they join, start, absorbing and understand the language, and they come and tell us, like, oh, what you said is now evident. I can see my son talking, because to them speaking is a reflection of understanding the language. And we're not talking about just literary skills. The conversation, being able to hold a recognized, a well-established conversation, is a true reflection of acquiring a language. And most of the parents here in the country, they travel outside, so abroad, and they say, like, well, my son now is the navigator for us. And my daughter is the one who leads the conversations when we go to a restaurant, when we are in the airport. And to them, this is a huge accomplishment. And the fear they had at the beginning starts, decreasing, and they build more trust in the organization, the approach that you have with them.
It is a huge accomplishment, though, the fact that they have the confidence to do that, and it's a big testament to the success of what you're doing at your school, if that's what's happening. And you also mentioned, actually, thinking about ways in which you can kind of build students' language skills and also develop some of these soft skills that we talked about earlier. Renata, you mentioned project-based learning is something that your school practices. And I wondered if you wanted to say anything about the role that projects can play, really, in helping students to develop a complex set of skills.
Yeah, I believe the projects not only help the students to develop this complete set of skills, but they also help us connecting the whole school community and engaging the school community into the English environment. because most of our directors and our coordinators for the other subject areas, they do not speak English. So English is new to them too. So we, the bilingual team at the schools, are the ones who try to make this happen. And the projects, they help us with that. They help us with raising cultural awareness with students. So we try to bring case studies. We try to bring different points of view from different countries and different cultures than the Brazilian ones. And we also bring the teachers from math, from history, from arts, the coordinator, the director, to participate, even though it's not an active participation, but to observe. And when they get to see what students are able to do and how comfortable they are with the language, they become advocates for the program. And it's easier for them to talk about and to actually mention to other parents and saying, look, don't worry, even though it might seem difficult for us as adults, the kids will get it and they will get pretty good at it. So projects really, really help us as a whole.
Yeah, great. And Andrew, I saw you nodding there. Is that an approach that you have also had experience implementing?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think anything as extensive or elaborate as what Renata was just talking about. But certainly in the classroom, getting students involved in projects, tasks, and assignments that number one, take place over the course of a number of different weeks. There's a number of different steps that involve research and inquiry skills, and that require students to really engage in authentic writing and language skills. That's definitely part of my language acquisition classes. So giving students, for example, the opportunity to imagine. We had one unit about what would the school of the future look like. What would a school look like in 40 or 50 years from now? Students had to
real
imagine
world problems.
Right, real world problems. So engaging students in those kinds of really meaningful types of tasks is really good for engaging them, but also for building some of their skills in terms of project management, time management, and other kinds of study skill related stuff.
Yeah. And you talked about the importance of authenticity earlier too. And what kind of role do you see, Andrew, authentic material playing in helping prepare students to study some of their curriculum in English, and also in terms of helping them develop a global mindset?
Well, I think one, especially for university-bound students, authentic materials are the types of things that they will read and interface with in an English medium classroom at university. And if they're going to university and in English, a primarily English-speaking country, students will need to interact with and use and understand those types of texts. So I think that's one advantage. But I also just think that authentic texts tend to be more engaging and interesting for students. They can be more challenging for sure, and they require more support from teachers to get students to be able to understand them and use them and write them. But I think with that support, students are generally more engaged with those types of projects and texts.
And I wonder, is there any kind of criteria that any of you, actually, I'll open up this to all three of you, any criteria that you would have for the selection of authentic texts that they would need to fulfill in order for you to consider them appropriate for your students and effective?
I may add to this is what we do here with the limitation that we have in the culture, being a very conservative country, for text to be able to be effective with us is to be appropriately, not tailored,
Culturally appropriate.
culturally appropriate one, and focuses on skill rather than just, entertainment. There
Yeah.
is a skill behind it, because by the end of the academic year, you can teach as many as what, 6, 7, 8 texts, and those texts need to be really full of meaning and full of skills in order to maximize the knowledge that the students are going to acquire from them. You're
They
going
have to be meaty. They have to give you lots to work with, lots of
Yeah.
angles that you can exploit.
The other
Yeah.
point is that for them to be universal, they fit. They fit the country, and then they're going to be benefit. They will benefit the students once they graduate. Something else that we do here is maybe I'm just hitting now at Renata's project idea and Andrew's, is that in order to prepare those students also for universities, something that we started implementing this year in the school is giving them career advice in English. So they're learning the language, and at the same time they're acquiring skills that are going to be beneficial for them once they graduate, go to college, and in the life to come. Those skills are key, and you find that we found out that students are very excited and they are keen and eager to take on such big task of determining where am I going to go with my life. And a lot of them have changed their views on, in Kuwait, there are 3 top criterias for careers. You're talking about medicine, engineering, or being a pilot. And we had students change their views on what they want to do with their life, because they never had the chance to learn that. So English here was a medium of instruction.
Opening the world out to them and letting them see different
Exactly.
possibilities.
That was really something big for them.
Yeah. Great. Well, I think now we have 15 minutes left of this session, so it would be great for us to move on to the questions. I see some questions I haven't, because I've been so absorbed in this discussion that I haven't actually read the questions myself yet. So Emily, I'm going to ask you if any of the questions have jumped out at you, that and if you want to start with the first one.
Yeah, some of them have been answered as we've gone along in the panel. But one, I think that makes sense to kick it off with, is someone asked, do you think media can help with learning English, specifically in non-English speaking countries? And I'll just throw it out and see if anyone has an answer to that, or something they'd like to weigh in on.
Media, maybe multimedia content, I imagine.
Yep, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Well, I think it definitely helps. I can certainly relate to that. When I started learning English a long time ago, we definitely didn't have as many different ways of getting in touch with the language as we do now, because of multimedia content, because of the internet, because of streaming channels and everything. But students also need to practice. So I believe media helps with exposure, so they can listen to it, they can read it, they can watch English, but they also need to practice. And that actually depends on the schools in countries like Brazil, where we can't go anywhere to practice English, and English is not widely spoken. The amount of hours and having a program that allows students to listen to, but also speak English, they are really important.
And another question that I spotted, Dr. Mansour was asking about what are the best strategies for developing creativity in students? Any thoughts that anyone would like to share on that?
All right. What we're trying to implement nowadays is we try to expose the students to international competition that will promote the idea of creativity, giving them such small tasks and ask them questions or tasks that will challenge their day-to-day, let's say, routine in class, those will help the students become more creative in the terms of how to maneuver such a simple idea in a way that's going to probably win me some kind of trophy somewhere. Those competitions can help. Aside from the idea of just the creativity, and you're also engaging them in the outer world outside of their own school. And I think that that's going to be very helpful if they try to implement such a thing.
Great, thank you, Mahmoud. Anything anybody would like to add to that?
I think one thing, just some very simple things, starting class with a warm-up that's often an icebreaker in which students have the opportunity to either do a role play with other students, to play an icebreaker like 2 truths and a lie, or 10 things I can't live without, or show and tell. Those are really small ways to build creative thinking skills into your everyday lesson practice. Another great resource is visible thinking exercises. So things like think, pair, share, or compass points. There's a whole website with these different kinds of visible thinking exercises that help students to practice the language, but also to practice creatively brainstorming and thinking of new ideas. And students usually find those engaging, but also very helpful for building the skills.
So drawing them in and getting them to be co-creators of kind of content and meaning. Yeah. One of our colleagues, Laura, was asking, how old are these students who are thinking about their future and what they're going to do with their lives? Are they from what age do they start to consider these things?
If that has to do with the idea of the career pathway, career exploration, we start that with the grade 9ers. So the freshmen of the school start exploring multiple and different work, or career options, and start exploring them. And by the time they get to grade 11, they actually go into the process of selecting a career and choosing, zooming on and studying that career in depth.
Great. It seems like a good time to get them starting to think about that. Would that be comparable, Renata and Andrew, with when students in your schools start to turn their thoughts to the future and what they might want to be?
Yeah, it's pretty much the same. When they enter high school, they start looking at things and trying to find out more about the path they want to follow. Sometimes they are pretty decided. They have made up their minds already, but when they join high school, they change their minds because they start getting in contact with different subject areas that they didn't have before. But that is pretty much the same, around the same age. Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And any other strategies that people adopt in terms of opening students' ideas about the possibilities? And have you experienced similar things, Renata and Andrew, to what Mahmoud described around students sometimes being very focused on very specific careers for the future that maybe are informed by their parents and what their parents want them to do?
I think it happens everywhere. Here,
Yeah.
where I'm at, everybody wants to be doctors, like everybody. And this sometimes changes when, as I said before, students get in contact with the subjects and they learn that there are different things that they can do, and not only working with medicine, but I believe not as much as it used to be in the past. In the past, I believe it was pretty common for kids to follow their parents' footsteps and to follow the same career path. And nowadays they have so many options. And luckily parents, they just want kids to be happy and successful in the choices they're making. So that doesn't happen as often as it used to around when I was deciding things, for instance.
That's positive.
There's a
Oh.
nice question in here, just to maybe finish it off with, but from Luciana, asking, teaching teenagers and keeping them engaged can be a little more challenging than some other ages. What would be the top 3 features you all would look for in English materials for middle and high school students? Doesn't have to be 3, but even top 1 or 2.
Okay, so when we had that we had to make that choice about 3 years ago. The main thing that we wanted to have is a curriculum that is going to be comprehensive in terms of engaging the students culturally, number one. Something that is going to be written from point of views of people who probably lived similar experiences learning languages as a second language. And thus, when we decided we have in the textbook that we're using right now, we have a lot of texts that are written by second language speakers, Spanish, Mexican, because that will make it easier for us to adapt it to the culture, because he lived similar situation, belonging to a certain place in that text, for example. The other point is inclusive to all skills together at the same time, where you don't need a lot of time supplementing for things from the outside. And incorporating the idea of writing into what they're reading, because a lot of the times you feel that the textbooks treat writing as a separate skill, where they need to, they're studying some sort of, let's say, short story, but then they write a biography. And we feel like the students are kind of lost there. So these are, for me, these were the 3 top important things to consider.
That's interesting. Would that echo your thoughts, Renata and Andrew?
Yeah, definitely. And right in the beginning of the panel, my colleagues mentioned materials and classes being relevant and interesting. So I would add to that when we choose materials, we have to look for materials that will bring relevant issues for students, so that they will keep interested in what we're teaching. And also giving us a possibility of adapting and adjusting whenever it's necessary, so that we can tailor-made it for the culture and for the public we're teaching a specific classroom.
Yeah, I very much agree. And I also want to echo both Renata and Mahmoud's thoughts about, I think that the texts have to be interesting, but they also have to be very intentional for the skills that you're teaching and the skills that students really need. So you can't just take, I think, a text that is generically interesting for students, but it doesn't really help them with the reading or the writing skills that they actually, have to develop. So that's what's really challenging. One of the many challenges of finding resources is they have to check all of those boxes, be interesting, engaging, culturally appropriate. Students have to be able to relate to them, and they have to fit in your curriculum. And that, finding texts that fit all of those characteristics isn't always easy.
As is developing them. So as someone who heads up a publishing team, it's really helpful to get that kind of input from you, and that's why we reach out to you too, and do this kind of research to really gain a better understanding of that. Just as it's a huge challenge to achieve all of the things that you've described today, in terms of preparing students with all of these complex skill sets that they're going to need to navigate this world as multilingual learners, as people who are culturally able to communicate interculturally, to go on to study potentially abroad in lots of the cases for you, Mahmoud and Andrew, particularly. Renata, I think less so from what you described. And it is it's an enormous achievement. really the types of successes that you've described that you're having with your students, and that you're so connected to what their needs are, and in not least also managing a complex host of stakeholders that you and their expectations too. I think it's been a really interesting discussion. I hope everybody who joined us today enjoyed it as much as I did. Really, you know, opened up lots of different facets. It would be great if we had even more time to explore them. But thank you so much, Renata, Mahmoud and Andrew, for joining us today and sharing with us your experiences. Thank you on behalf of everybody who joined us, and thank you too to all of those people who joined us today to listen and to ask questions and to interact with us.
Yeah, huge thank you to everyone. We will be posting this recording. If you'd like to share it with any of your colleagues who you think would find it interesting and valuable, please do. It will be on our webinar website in a few days. We'll also send you all a certificate of attendance for joining us here today for an hour. Thank you, as Rachel said, for taking an hour out of your very busy days as educators for being here with us. And just huge thank you to our panelists too. I know Andrew and Mahmoud have been teaching all day, and Renata, it's the middle of her day. So thank you all for taking time to be here. It was a really interesting discussion. After this, we do have a short feedback survey. Please do let us know what you thought of this session, of this format. We'd love to get your feedback as we start to put together more panels and different types of webinar sessions than what we usually do. So we hope you'd enjoyed it. And as I'm looking in the chat box and seeing the comments come in now, seems like a lot of people really did find this valuable. So thank you. Have a great rest of your afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you are. And we hope you have a great day.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.